The rain came down in sheets that Friday night, hammering the roof of Maple Grove Diner like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. November in Millbrook, Ohio meant cold that seeped into your bones and darkness and that arrived too early, swallowing the town whole by 5 in the afternoon. The diner sat at the edge of town where the streetlights flickered with unreliable rhythm, and the pavement had cracked years ago wounds in the asphalt that the city council promised to fix every election cycle and never did. It was the kind of place where nobody came unless they had to, unless the rest of the world had closed its doors and this fluorescent lit sanctuary was all that remained. Nathan Cole wiped down the Formica counter for the third time that hour. Not because it needed cleaning, but because his hands needed something to do. The clock above the pie display read 10:47, and his shift still had another 2 hours and 13 minutes before he could clock out, drive home through empty streets, and check on his daughter sleeping in the room next to his. 34 years old, though some nights he felt 50 watching his reflection in the chrome napkin dispensers and seeing a man he barely recognized anymore. 5 years of this had carved lines around his eyes that hadn't existed before, had turned his dark hair gray at the temples, had bent his shoulders into a permanent slight hunch from carrying trays and something heavier that no one could see. His uniform was clean because he ironed it every morning before Sophie woke up, a ritual he maintained even when exhaustion made his hands shake. The fabric had worn thin at the elbows, and the collar had begun to fray, but the creases were sharp and the buttons polished. Small dignities, Claire used to call them. The things that cost nothing but said everything about who you chose to be when no one was watching. The diner itself had a particular smell that Nathan had stopped noticing years ago, but that visitors always commented on: a mixture of coffee that had been brewing too long, and bacon grease that had seeped into every surface, and the faint sweetness of apple pie warming in the display case. The booths along the windows were upholstered in vinyl that had once been cherry red, but had faded to something closer to rust. The seats cracked in places and repaired with silver duct tape that Walt Brennan, the owner, swore was temporary. The counter stools swiveled if you pushed hard enough, their chrome bases spotted with age. Photographs lined the walls, black and white images of Millbrook from the 1950s, when the steel mill was running 3 shifts and the town had a future everyone could believe in. Earl Thompson sat at his usual spot at the counter, third stool from the register, his trucker cap pushed back on his head and a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. 62 years old, with hands like worn leather and a voice roughened by decades of cigarettes, he'd finally quit 3 years ago. He was telling a story Nathan had heard twice before, something about hauling a load of refrigerators to Montana during a blizzard in 1987, and Nathan listened in with the practiced attention of a man who understood that sometimes people didn't need new ears, they just needed ears at all. So there I am, middle of nowhere, snow coming down so thick I can't see the hood of my rig, Earl was saying, his hands moving through the air to paint the scene. Radio's out, heater's barely working, and I'm thinking, Thompson, you old fool, this is how it ends. Frozen solid next to 23 Frigidaires. Nathan nodded at the right moments, made the appropriate sounds of surprise and concern, even though he knew the story ended with Earl making it through, finding a truck stop and meeting a waitress named Dolores, who gave him free pie. The details never changed, but something about Earl's need to tell it never changed either. And Nathan had learned that constancy had its own kind of comfort. You're going to fall asleep at the wheel if you keep drinking coffee this late, Earl. The older man waved off the concern with a hand that bore the calluses of 40 years gripping a steering wheel. You worry too much, kid. Gotta run to Indianapolis tomorrow. Need to stay sharp. But he pushed the cup away slightly, a concession that cost him nothing but acknowledged Nathan's care. In booth 3, pressed against the window, where condensation blurred the view of the empty parking lot, Melissa Torres hunched over a textbook thick enough to double as a doorstop. 19 years old, first-generation college student, studying nursing at the community college across town because her mother had cleaned houses for 30 years and wanted something different for her daughter. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she'd made it last, stretching a $2 purchase into a warm place to study where the lights worked and nobody told her to leave. Nathan had watched her count coins more than once, her face flushing red, when she came up short, her fingers sorting pennies and dimes with the desperate precision of someone who knew exactly what she didn't have. Tonight she'd ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small coffee and nothing else, and when Nathan brought the check, he'd already crossed out the total and written 0 beneath it. Her eyes went wide when she saw it, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Nathan, I can't accept this. Sure you can. He kept his own voice low, casual, like it was nothing. Pay it forward someday when you're wearing scrubs and saving lives, that's all I ask. She looked like she might cry, her lower lip trembling slightly, and he moved to the next table before she could argue or thank him, or make it into something bigger than it needed to be. Kindness wasn't supposed to be a production, Claire used to say. It was supposed to be like breathing so natural you didn't even notice you were doing it. The kitchen door swung open and Frank Russo emerged with a fresh pot of coffee, the steam rising from it like a prayer ascending. 50 years old, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with a face that looked like it had been carved from oak and then weathered by decades of kitchen and heat. He'd been cooking at Maple Grove for 15 years, ever since the restaurant in Columbus, where he'd worked as a line cook, had closed down. Before that, he dreamed of running his own place, but dreams had a way of evaporating when life demanded you show up for the shift in front of you. Table 6 needs more napkins. Frank set the coffee pot on its warmer, and that guy in booth 1 has been nursing the same cup of decaf for 2 hours. Walt's going to have a fit. Walt's not here. Walt's always here in spirit, watching, judging. Frank's mouth twitched in something that was almost a smile. How's Sophie? The question hit Nathan the way it always did, a small blow to the center of his chest that reminded him of everything waiting at home. Good, growing too fast, started reading chapter books last month. Smart kid, gets it from her mother. Frank disappeared back into the kitchen, and Nathan stood there for a moment holding the coffee pot, thinking about Claire and chapter books, and how she'd wanted Sophie to love reading the way she had. Every night before bed, even when she was exhausted from a double shift at the hospital, Claire would read to their daughter, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Good Night Moon, Where the Wild Things Are. Now Nathan did it alone, stumbling over words Claire would have made sing, but doing it anyway because some promises you kept even after the person you made them to was gone. His phone buzzed in his pocket at exactly 9 o'clock, the alarm he'd set. Because Sophie always called at 9, they always needed to hear his voice before she could sleep. He stepped into the kitchen where the industrial dishwasher hummed and the smell of grease was strongest. It's Sophie. Frank nodded without looking up from the grill he was scraping clean. Go ahead. Nathan answered on the second ring, pressing the phone to his ear like a lifeline. Hey, sweetheart. Daddy. Her voice was small and sleepy, filtered through the cheap phone speaker, but it was the most beautiful sound in the world. I miss you. I miss you too, baby. So much. What are you doing still awake? Mrs. Patterson let me stay up to call you. She said 5 more minutes, then bed. Mrs. Patterson, the 68-year-old widow who lived next door, who watched Sophie every night. Nathan worked for less than he could afford to pay, who did it because she said the apartment was too quiet since her husband passed, and a child's laughter was better than any medicine. Nathan owed her more than money owed her in ways that couldn't be calculated or repaid. When are you coming home? Late, baby, but I'll be there when you wake up, I promise. You always say that. And I'm always there, aren't I? A small pause. Yeah, you are. Something in his chest pulled tight, a physical ache that never quite went away. 5 years of this, 5 years of missing bedtimes and school plays and the sound of her breathing in the next room. 5 years of being a voice on the phone when he should have been a presence in the room, a hand holding hers, a father instead of a phantom. Good night, Sophie. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. That's a lot of stars, Daddy. That's exactly how much. Okay, love you too, night. The line went dead and Nathan stood there for a long moment staring at the cracked tile floor. The kitchen was too hot and too loud and too small, and he felt suddenly like the walls were pressing in, like the life he'd built was pressing in, squeezing him into something less than he'd meant to be. Claire used to say he was the best father she knew. He wondered what she'd think now, watching him come home at 2 in the morning and collapse into bed still smelling of coffee and grease, waking at 6 to make Sophie breakfast before school running on 4 hours of sleep, and the stubborn refusal to admit that he couldn't keep doing this forever. When he pushed back through the kitchen doors into the dining room, he noticed her for the first time, the woman in the corner booth. She didn't belong here. That much was obvious from the moment his eyes found her sitting alone in the booth farthest from the door, the one beneath the photograph of Main Street from 1952, when the movie theater still had a working marquee. Everything about her screamed wrong place, wrong time, wrong universe. Her suit was black and sharply tailored, the kind that cost more than Nathan's monthly rent, the fabric holding its shape in a way that spoke of expensive materials and expert hands. A scarf draped around her neck, silk probably deep burgundy against the black. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably required significant effort, not a strand out of place, despite the rain that was still hammering down outside. The watch on her wrist caught the fluorescent light when she lifted her coffee cup, and Nathan recognized the shape of money in that glint. Not the loud, obvious money of gold chains and diamond rings, but the quiet money that didn't need to announce itself because everyone who mattered already knew. Her handbag sat on the seat beside her leather, so fine and supple it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She'd been sitting there for over an hour. Nathan realized this with a start, scanning his memory for when she'd arrived, finding the moment buried beneath coffee refills in Earl's story and the check for Melissa. She'd come in sometime around 8:30, ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, and then simply sat there. No phone in her hands, no book or magazine, no laptop open, no paper spread across the table. Just sitting, watching. He approached with a coffee pot the way he approached every customer, the way he'd been approaching customers for 5 years. Professional, friendly, present, but not intrusive. "Can I warm that up for you, ma'am?" She looked up, and her eyes stopped him mid-step, dark brown, almost black in the diner's lighting, sharp and assessing in a way that made him feel suddenly exposed, like she could see through the uniform to something underneath. There was intelligence in that gaze and calculation and something else he couldn't quite name. Not warmth exactly, but not coldness either. Interest, maybe. The kind of interest a scientist shows in experiment. "Hope the coffee's warm enough for this cold night." The words came out automatically, the same pleasantry he had offered 1,000 times before. "It's fine." Her voice matched her appearance, controlled, measured, revealing nothing. She looked back down at her cup, a dismissal so subtle it could have been accidental if not for the precision of the movement. Nathan retreated, unsettled in a way he couldn't explain. Something about the woman made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, not from fear exactly, but from the sense of being seen in a way he wasn't used to being seen. In a place like this, at this hour, customers looked through him, past him, around him. They saw the uniform, the coffee pot, the check when it arrived. They didn't see him. This woman saw him, and he wasn't sure he liked it. He busied himself with other tasks, refilling Earl's coffee one more time, checking on the silent man in booth 1, who was indeed nursing his decaf with the determination of someone who had nowhere else to go. Amy Chen, the other server on duty, emerged from her break and took over the far section, her young face tired but her smile intact. 25 years old, saving money for cosmetology school, working nights because the tips were better, and her days were filled with practice mannequin heads and dreams of her own salon someday. "Who's the suit?" Amy jerked her head toward the corner booth, voice low enough not to carry. "No idea. Been here over an hour, just watching." "Weird. Rich people don't usually hang out in diners at almost 11 on a Friday night. Rich people don't usually do a lot of things." Nathan moved through the rest of his shift with the woman's presence like a weight on his peripheral vision. Every time he glanced toward the corner booth, she was still there, still watching, still sitting with that untouched slice of pie and that coffee cup that never seemed to empty, no matter how little she drank. He caught her eyes on him more than once, tracking his movements as he cleared tables and took orders and made small talk with Earl about the weather and the Buckeyes and whether the highway construction on Route 40 would ever actually finish. At 10:30, she stood and walked to the counter. Nathan met her at the register, the routine of it grounding him. "Just a coffee and poem." "Yes." He rang up the total, his fingers moving automatically over the ancient keys. "That'll be $8.50. She handed him a credit card without a word. The card is heavy, the kind of premium metal that certain banks reserve for their wealthiest clients. He ran it through the reader, printed the receipt, handed her the merchant copy and a pen. She signed with quick, precise strokes, left the receipt on the counter, and walked out into the rain without looking back. The door chimed as it closed behind her, and the cold November air gusted in briefly before the warmth reasserted itself. Nathan looked down at the receipt. The tip line was blank. $0. He felt the disappointment settle low in his gut, familiar and dull. Not surprise exactly. He'd been doing this long enough to know that the wealthy rarely tipped well, that there was an inverse relationship between the cost of someone's watch and their willingness to leave an extra few dollars for the person who'd spent the last hour refilling their coffee. They thought the meal was enough. They thought their presence was a gift. They thought a lot of things that people who'd never worked service never had to examine. He folded the receipt and moved to clear her table. That was when he saw the envelope. It sat beneath the edge of the plate, white and crisp, folded once down the middle. On the outside, in handwriting so precise, it looked almost printed, 3 words: "For the waiter who remembers names." Nathan picked it up. His hands were shaking, though he couldn't have said why. The envelope was good paper, heavy stock, the kind you use for invitations to events where the dress code was more than just nice clothes. He opened it carefully, as if it might contain something that could bite. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a business card. The paper read in that same precise handwriting, "I need to see you. This is not charity. This is a proposal. Come to Grayson Industries tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ask for Eleanor Grayson. Do not ignore this." The business card was thick and embossed, the letters standing slightly raised from the surface. Eleanor Grayson, CEO, Grayson Industries. Nathan's breath caught. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Eleanor Grayson had been on the cover of Forbes twice in the last 5 years, had been profiled in the Wall Street Journal, and interviewed on CNBC, and featured in a documentary about self-made American success stories. Grayson Industries was a tech company worth billions, started in a garage outside Cleveland 30 years ago, and grown into something that employed thousands and had offices in cities Nathan had never visited. Eleanor Grayson was one of the richest women in Ohio, one of the richest women in the country, and she just spent an hour sitting in a diner that didn't even have a working ice machine, drinking coffee that cost less than parking in the garage attached to her building, probably cost leaving $0 as a tip, and a note telling a waiter she needed to see him. His first thought was that it was a joke, some elaborate prank, though he couldn't imagine who would bother, couldn't think of anyone who would go to such lengths for such a pointless result. His second thought was that it was a scam, some kind of confidence game he couldn't quite see the shape of yet. Rich people didn't leave notes for waiters. They didn't sit in run-down diners watching the staff for over an hour. They didn't need anything from men who made less in a year than they made in a day. But something about the way she'd watched him, something about those dark eyes tracking his every movement, studying him like she was looking for something specific, testing him maybe, evaluating. He slipped the note and card into his pocket and finished his shift in a daze. The drive home took 12 minutes in good weather, but the rain slowed. Everything reduced visibility to the length of his headlight beams, turned familiar streets into suggestions glimpsed through sheets of water. His car was a 2008 Honda Civic with 187,000 miles on it, bought used from a lot in Columbus when Sophie was 3, and the old car had finally given up its ghost. The brakes needed replacing. He could hear them grinding every time he stopped, metal on metal, a countdown to a repair bill he couldn't afford. The heater worked mostly, and the radio picked up the local stations if he held the antenna wire at the right angle, and it was his paid off one less thing he owed anyone. The apartment complex appeared through the rain, a 3-story building that had been new sometime in the 1970s and had been slowly surrendering to entropy ever since. Unit 2B, second floor, 1 bedroom that Nathan had given to Sophie, and a living room with a fold-out couch where he slept. The stairs were concrete and uneven, worn smooth by decades of feet, and he climbed them slowly, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The apartment was dark except for the nightlight in Sophie's room, a small plastic owl that glowed soft yellow and cast shapes on the ceiling that she'd named and given stories to. He checked on her first. Always checked on her first, standing in the doorway of her room and watching the rise and fall of her small chest beneath the blankets. 7 years old, so small, so trusting, curled around the stuffed rabbit Claire had given her when she was born, the one she called Mr. Buttons, even though it didn't have any buttons, the fur worn thin from years of love. Claire had looked like that when she slept peaceful, in a way she rarely was when awake. The same slightly parted lips, the same tangle of dark hair on the pillow, the same complete surrender to unconsciousness that Nathan envied and couldn't achieve. He hadn't slept through the night since she died. 4, 5 hours at most, and that was usually interrupted by dreams that felt more real than waking, by the sound of her voice calling from another room, by the smell of her shampoo that sometimes came to him in the darkness for no reason he could explain. His phone buzzed, an email notification. He walked into the living room, didn't turn on the lights, just slumped onto the couch and squinted at the screen. The sender was Millbrook Elementary School, the subject line important update on tuition. He read it twice to make sure he understood. Next semester's tuition was increasing. The school was implementing a new enhanced learning program, which required additional staffing and materials and technology upgrades. The cost was going from $1,200 to $2,800, an increase of over 100% payable in full by January 15th, or in 2 installments with a $20 processing fee added to each. His bank account had $340 in it. His next paycheck was 6 days away and would be approximately $480 after taxes. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Nathan sat there in the darkness and did the math. He didn't need to do the math. He already knew the math that had been his constant companion for 5 years. There wasn't enough. There wouldn't be enough. There was never going to be enough, not unless something changed, and nothing ever changed, not in the direction he needed. Sophie couldn't transfer schools. Her friends were there. Her teachers knew her history, knew to be gentle with her on the days she got quiet, the days when she missed her mother most. It was the only stable thing in her life since Claire died, the one constant while everything else shifted and crumbled and rearranged itself around the absence at the center. He couldn't take that away from her. He wouldn't. But $2,800, he might as well have been asked to produce $28 million. The note in his pocket felt suddenly heavy. He pulled it out and read it again by the pale glow of his phone screen. Eleanor Grayson, Grayson Industries. 10 in the morning. This is not charity. This is a proposal. What kind of proposal? What could a billionaire possibly want from a man who couldn't afford to buy his daughter a $15 book about planets? He thought about ignoring it, throwing the note away, pretending it had never happened, going back to his life of double shifts and worn-out cars and mathematics that never balanced. Rich people didn't help poor people without wanting something in return. That was how the world worked. He'd learned that the hard way in the months after Claire died, when the medical bills came and the life insurance was less than they'd thought, and the bank wanted their money regardless of whether his wife was alive to help him earn it. But then he thought about Sophie, about the email, about the $340 that wouldn't stretch no matter how he pulled. If there was even a 1% chance this could help her. Could he really walk away? He lay down on the couch but didn't sleep. He watched the ceiling, the shadows cast by the streetlight outside filtering through cheap blinds, and thought about Claire. She'd been a nurse at the county hospital. Pediatric ward mostly, though she picked up shifts in the ER when they were short-staffed. She'd worked doubles and overnight shifts and never complained, came home with her feet swollen and her back aching, and still found the energy to play with Sophie, to cook dinner, to be present in ways Nathan couldn't manage after a regular 8-hour day at his desk job. The night before she died, she'd kissed Sophie goodnight and then sat next to Nathan on the same couch, leaning into him the way she always did when she was tired. Promise me something. Her voice was soft, almost dreamy. Anything. If anything ever happens to me, give her the life I couldn't give her. Don't let her grow up thinking the world is small. He'd laughed, uncomfortable the way he always was with serious conversations. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're too stubborn to let anything happen. Promise me anyway. Okay, I promise. She'd fallen asleep against his shoulder, and he'd carried her to bed, and in the morning she'd made pancakes for Sophie and kissed Nathan goodbye and driven off to work and never come back. The drunk driver who hit her spent 18 months in prison. Nathan had gone to the sentencing, sat in the back of the courtroom, watched a 22-year-old kid cry and apologize, and get a punishment that seemed both too long and too short. What was 18 months against a lifetime? What was prison against a daughter growing up without a mother, a husband sleeping on a fold-out couch, a family reduced to its component parts? Afterward, a victim's advocate had asked if he wanted to say anything to confront the young man, to express his anger or his grief. Nathan had just shaken his head. What words could possibly be adequate? What could he say that would change anything? Undo anything? Bring her back for even one more minute. He'd sold the house they'd bought together, the small 3-bedroom, in a quiet neighborhood where they'd planned to raise Sophie. Sold it and paid off the mortgage, and used what was left to pay the medical bills and the funeral costs and the credit card debt they'd accumulated, furnishing a nursery and buying baby gear. Moved into this apartment with its paper-thin walls and its unreliable plumbing and its complete lack of the future they'd imagined. And he'd kept his promise. Or tried to. God, he'd tried. But trying wasn't the same as succeeding, and the world kept getting smaller no matter how hard he pushed against its edges. At 6 in the morning, Sophie crawled into his arms on the couch. Her hair was a mess, her eyes still half closed, and she pressed her face against his chest the way she'd done since she was a baby. "Daddy, did you sleep okay?" "I did, sweetheart." The lie came easily. He'd been telling it for years. "I dreamed about Mommy." His throat closed. He pulled her closer, felt the warmth of her small body, the absolute trust she still had in him, despite everything. "What did you dream?" "She was in a garden, with lots of flowers. She said she was proud of us." His eyes burned. "She is, baby. I promise she is." "Are you going to work today?" "Not until tonight. We have the whole day together." Sophie smiled, her face lighting up in the way that made everything else seem small and manageable. "Can we make pancakes?" "We can make whatever you want." They spent the morning in the small kitchen, Sophie standing on a step stool to help stir the batter, while Nathan supervised and cleaned up the flour she spilled and pretended to be outraged when she ate chocolate chips directly from the bag. The pancakes came out lopsided and slightly burned on one side, but Sophie declared them the best pancakes in the world, and Nathan felt something loosen in his chest as he watched her eat. This was why he did it. All of it. The late nights and the tired mornings and the mathematics that never balanced. This moment right here, his daughter with maple syrup on her chin and joy in her eyes, alive and healthy and still innocent enough to believe that chocolate chip pancakes could fix anything. After breakfast, Sophie showed him her homework from the week pages of addition problems and spelling words in a drawing she'd made of their family. There were 3 figures in the picture, not 2. Daddy with his brown hair, Sophie with her pigtails, and Mommy with wings floating above them, both smiling. "Mrs. Patterson says Mommy is an angel now." Sophie traced the crayon wings with one finger. "She watches over us." "Mrs. Patterson is right. Do you think she can see us right now?" Nathan looked at the picture, at the bright yellow sun in the corner and the green grass beneath their feet and the rainbow arching over everything, because Sophie believed in rainbows the way she believed in everything good. "I think she sees everything we do, and I think she's proud of you every single day." That afternoon, Nathan sat at his laptop while Sophie watched a movie in the living room. The search engine loaded slowly, the apartment's Wi-Fi struggling as it always did, and he typed Eleanor Grayson into the search bar. Pages of results appeared, articles about her company interviews, about her philanthropy profiles from business magazines, her Wikipedia page with its lengthy list of achievements and honors. He clicked through them, methodically reading everything he could find, building a picture of the woman who'd sat in his diner and watched him work and left $0 on the table. The broad strokes were what he expected. Self-made billionaire tech industry started in a garage with 2 partners and a conviction that she could build something better than what existed. One of her partners left early, the other died in a car accident 10 years in, and Eleanor had built the rest alone, expanding from software into hardware, into cloud services, into artificial intelligence. Grayson Industries now employed over 8,000 people, had contracts with the federal government, had been named one of the most innovative companies in America 3 years running. The personal details were sparser. Divorced once, no children, known for working 18-hour days and expecting the same from her executives. Famously private, rarely gave interviews about anything other than business, had no presence on social media, and seemed to view public attention as an annoyance rather than an opportunity. But then, buried several pages deep in the search results, Nathan found an article that stopped him cold. It was from a local newspaper dated 2010, when Grayson Industries was still a mid-sized company rather than a tech giant. The headline read, "From waitress to boardroom, Eleanor Grayson credits late mother's work ethic." He read it twice, then 3 times. Eleanor Grayson's mother had been named Margaret. She'd raised Eleanor alone after her husband died when Eleanor was 3 years old. Margaret had worked as a waitress for over 20 years at a place called Morton's Diner in a small town outside Cleveland, working double shifts and overtime and holidays, sacrificing everything to put her daughter through school. Margaret Grayson had died in 2018 after a long illness. The article didn't specify what kind, just noted that Eleanor had taken a rare week off from running her company to be with her mother at the end. Nathan stared at the screen. Eleanor Grayson's mother had been a waitress, a single parent, working two jobs to give her daughter a chance at something better. Just like him. Something shifted in his understanding, though he wasn't sure yet what it meant. The woman who'd left $0 in a mysterious note wasn't just a random billionaire amusing herself with the working class. There was something else going on, something personal, something connected to a history that mirrored his own in ways he was only beginning to see. He kept reading, kept searching, kept building the picture. Found an article about Eleanor's philanthropy focused on workforce development and education access. Found another about a foundation she'd started in her mother's name, funding scholarships for first-generation college students. Found a quote from an interview 5 years ago. "My mother taught me that dignity is not about what you have. It's about how you treat people when no one is watching." How you treat people when no one is watching. Nathan thought about the past hour, replaying it in his mind. The way Eleanor had sat there observing. The way her eyes had tracked him as he refilled Earl's coffee and comped Melissa's meal and took the call from Sophie. She'd been watching him treat people when he thought no one was watching. The realization should have felt invasive, creepy even. Instead, it felt like an answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Nathan made his decision. He would go to Grayson Industries. Not because he believed in miracles, not because he thought a billionaire was going to save him, but because he needed to know why she'd sat there, why she'd watched him, why she'd left that note, and maybe, just maybe, because refusing to even try felt like giving up. And he'd promised Claire he would never do that. Sophie was eating breakfast when he told her he had somewhere to go. "Can I come?" Her face was hopeful, eager for anything that broke the routine. "Not this time, sweetheart, but I'll be back before lunch, I promise." "Where are you going?" He hesitated. "To meet someone, about something that might help us." Sophie nodded seriously as if she understood perfectly. "Okay, Daddy, I'll be good for Mrs. Patterson." He kissed her forehead and left her with the neighbor, drove through streets that were still wet from last night's rain and headed toward Columbus. Grayson Industries occupied a 40-story tower of glass and steel that reflected the gray November sky and made everyone who walked past feel small just by existing. Nathan parked in a garage 3 blocks away because the visitor lot charged $30 for the first hour, and he sat in his car for 10 minutes before walking toward the building. He wore the only suit he owned, the one from his wedding 7 years ago when he'd been 30 pounds lighter, and the future had seemed like something he could hold in his hands. The shoulders were too tight now, the pants a little short, the color slightly faded, but it was the best he had, and some things you couldn't fake. The lobby of Grayson Industries smelled like expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Marble floors so polished they reflected the overhead lights like mirrors. A reception desk that looked like it belonged in a museum, staffed by a young woman with perfect hair and a smile that had been professionally optimized. "I'm here to see Eleanor Grayson." Nathan's voice came out rougher than he intended, nerves betraying him. The receptionist's smile didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. The assessment was quick and dismissive, taking in his outdated suit, his scuffed shoes, the absence of any appointment in her system. "Do you have an appointment?" "She told me to come. My name is Nathan Cole." The woman's fingers moved over her keyboard, and her expression flickered surprise, breaking through the professional mask for just a moment. She picked up a phone, murmured something he couldn't hear, listened, then hung up. "38th floor, elevator on the left." He rode up alone, watching the numbers climb in the reflective walls. His face stared back at him, pale and tired and out of place. A man who had wandered in from another life, another world, another set of expectations entirely. The doors opened onto a hallway of glass and dark wood designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. A young man in an expensive suit was waiting, and his expression was carefully neutral in the way that suggested he'd been briefed on the visitor's unconventional arrival. "Mr. Cole, right this way." They walked past offices where people sat at computers that cost more than Nathan's car, past conference rooms with views that stretched to the horizon, past art on the walls that was probably worth more than he'd make in a lifetime. The assistant stopped at a set of double doors at the end of the hallway, knocked twice, then opened them without waiting for a response. "Mr. Cole is here." The office was massive, minimalist, all clean lines and natural light with windows running from floor to ceiling that looked out over the city like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. The desk was large enough to fit Nathan's entire apartment, dark wood polished to a mirror shine, and behind it stood Eleanor Grayson. She wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her face seem sharper, more angular. Without the diner's fluorescent lights softening everything, she looked older than he'd thought, lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of hard work and harder decisions. But her eyes were the same, dark and assessing, missing nothing. "Thank you, David." Her voice was directed at the assistant, who nodded and closed the doors behind him. Eleanor gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "Please, sit." Nathan sat. The chair was leather expensive, more comfortable than anything he'd sat in since the furniture store, where he'd test-driven couches he couldn't afford. Eleanor didn't sit immediately. Instead, she walked to a small table near the window where a coffee maker sat, one of the expensive ones that ground beans fresh and probably cost more than his monthly grocery bill. "Coffee." "Sure." She made 2 cups in silence, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. It was strange watching a billionaire pour coffee. He'd expected her to have someone for that, to press a button and have it appear to never touch anything so mundane as a coffee pot. She brought both cups to the desk and sat across from him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy-weighted with everything neither of them had said yet. "Thank you for coming." Eleanor's voice was calm, controlled. "I wasn't sure you would." Nathan wrapped his hands around the cup. It was warm and solid, something to hold on to. "With all respect, Ms. Grayson, why am I here and why the 0 tip?" She took a sip of her coffee, then set it down carefully. "The tip was a test. I needed to see how you'd react to being overlooked." Something hot flared in his chest, the slow burn of insult mixing with the residual anxiety of being in a place so far above his station. "You tested me like some kind of experiment." "Yes." She didn't look away. "And you passed. You didn't curse me, didn't complain to your coworkers, didn't even frown. You just said thank you and wished me a good night." Nathan stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the quiet office. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not interested." "It's not a game. I came here because I thought maybe you needed something. That maybe this was real." His voice was harder now, frustration bleeding through. "But you're just bored. You wanted to see what the poor waiter would do when the rich lady stiffed him. I need someone who treats people with dignity, regardless of their status." Eleanor stood as well, meeting his eyes. "I've been looking for months. I watched you for over an hour in that diner. The way you handled the drunk trucker, the college girl who couldn't pay, the phone call with your daughter. You were kind when no one was watching. That's rare. So you insult me to prove a point. I test you to make sure you are real." She walked around the desk closer now, and Nathan noticed for the first time how tired she looked. Not the tiredness of a single sleepless night, but the accumulated exhaustion of years, decades, maybe the kind that settled into your bones and became part of who you were. "I'm offering you a community outreach manager for a project I'm launching. $75,000 a year, full benefits, and a scholarship for your daughter at one of the best private schools in the state." The number hit him like a physical blow. He actually took a step back, as if the words themselves had mass. 75,000. He made 23, working 60 hours a week. "What do you want from me?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. "I'm just a waiter. I don't have a degree in community outreach. I don't have connections. What could I possibly do for you? You've been there." Eleanor returned to her desk and picked up a folder, thick and heavy, clearly prepared in advance. "You know what it's like to work 2 jobs and still come up short, to smile at people who don't see you, to make choices no one should have to make. I need someone who won't treat struggling families like charity cases, someone who will see them as people." She held out the folder. Nathan took it, opened it. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, photographs. The header on the first page read, "Second Chances Initiative." He read through it slowly, each page revealing more of what she was proposing. A program for single parents in difficult circumstances, job training and placement assistance, childcare support, educational grants for their children. connections with companies willing to hire people who had gaps in their resumes, mental health resources, financial literacy training, a support network that would follow families for years, not just drop them after a single intervention. The budget was in the millions. You want me to run this? I want you to help build it, to make sure it actually helps people instead of just making me feel good. Eleanor sat back down and some of the sharpness went out of her posture, revealing something that looked almost like vulnerability. You have 3 days to think about it. If you say yes, you start in 2 weeks. Nathan closed the folder. His hands were shaking. This is too much. There has to be a catch. The catch is that you'll work harder than you've ever worked, that you'll carry the weight of knowing that families are depending on you, that you'll have to make decisions that affect real lives. She met his eyes. If that sounds easy, then you're not the right person. He wanted to say yes. God, he wanted to say yes. Sophie's school bill, the overdue electric, the car that needed new brakes. $75,000 would change everything. Would mean sleeping in an actual bedroom again. Would mean not counting coins at the grocery store. Would mean breathing room for the first time in 5 years. But nothing was free. Not like this. Not from people like her. I need to think about it. The words came out steadier than he felt. Eleanor nodded. 3 days, you have my number. He left the folder on her desk and walked out. His hands didn't stop shaking until he was back on the street. That night at the diner, he told Frank about the meeting. They were in the kitchen during the dinner rush, steam rising from the industrial dishwasher, the sound of sizzling grease providing cover for the conversation. Rich people don't give, Nathan. Frank scraped the grill with hard, angry motions. They buy. Whatever she's offering, she wants something back. The question is what? She said she needs someone who understands what struggling families go through. And you believe that? Nathan hesitated. I don't know, maybe. Her mother was a waitress, single parent like me. She worked at a diner her whole life. Frank stopped scraping and looked at him. Really looked. That's a good story. Doesn't mean it's the whole story. Amy pushed through the kitchen doors with a tray of dirty plates, her face flushed from the heat of the dining room. Heard about Grayson, she said, not bothering with preamble. My cousin worked for one of her companies. She's ruthless in business. Fires people without blinking. You sure you want to get involved with someone like that? Nathan leaned against the counter, the doubt that had been growing all day wrapped tighter around his chest. I don't know what I want. You want to take care of your kid. Frank's voice was softer now. We all get that. Just make sure you're not trading one kind of broke for another. The next morning, he called Eleanor's number. The assistant answered, but when Nathan gave his name, Eleanor picked up within 30 seconds. Mr. Cole, I need to know the real reason. No preamble, no politeness. Why me the actual reason? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then come back to my office, 2 o'clock. I need answers before. You'll have them, 2 o'clock. She hung up. He arrived at Grayson Industries at 1:45. This time he didn't wait outside. This time he walked through the lobby with something that felt almost like purpose. Nodded at the receptionist who remembered him and didn't need to check her system, rode the elevator up 38 floors without watching his reflection. Eleanor met him in the lobby of her floor, which surprised him. She was wearing the same charcoal suit or one identical to it, and there were shadows under her eyes that suggested she'd slept as poorly as he had. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for seeing me. She led him not to her office, but to a smaller conference room, one with a single window that looked out over a parking garage instead of a skyline. The space felt more human somehow, less designed to intimidate. She sat across from him at the table, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain, vulnerable even, like she was about to share something that cost her. My mother's name was Margaret. Nathan listened, not interrupting. She raised me alone. My father died when I was 3, heart attack, they said, though. I suspect it was exhaustion. He worked 3 jobs, trying to keep us afloat. When he was gone, she had to work even harder. Double shifts at Morton's Diner, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. She was exhausted all the time, but she never complained. Not once. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were folded tight on the table. When I was 15, she got hit by a drunk driver on her way home from work. Broke her back. 3 surgeries. Physical therapy for months. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. We were going to lose everything. Nathan felt something shift in his chest. The story was familiar. Too familiar. There was a man who used to come into Morton's every morning. My mother said he was poor, worked construction, could barely afford breakfast. But when he heard what happened, he organized a fundraiser, got the whole neighborhood involved, raised enough to cover most of the bills. Eleanor looked at him. My mother tried to find him after she recovered, wanted to thank him, pay him back, but he was gone. Moved away, someone said. She never got to thank him. It bothered her for the rest of her life. And you're looking for him. He died 5 years ago. I found out too late. Something in Eleanor's face changed, a softening around the edges. But I saw in you what my mother saw in him. Dignity without arrogance. Kindness without expectation. She used to say he always remembered her name, even though she was just the woman who poured his coffee. Her eyes met his. You do the same thing. You see people. That's why you. Nathan sat with that for a long moment. So this is about your mother. This is about honoring what she valued, what she taught me. Eleanor's voice was firm now, the vulnerability tucked away behind purpose. I'm not choosing you because you're poor. I'm choosing you because you're good. There's a difference. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to, but belief had burned him before. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? My mother wasn't good enough by society's standards. She never finished college, worked minimum wage her whole life. But she was good. That's what matters. She paused. That's all that ever really matters. I need to talk to my daughter. Eleanor nodded. Of course. He went home and made Sophie her favorite dinner, macaroni and cheese from a box with cut-up hot dogs, the kind of meal Claire had made for him when they were first married and broke and surviving on love and cheap carbohydrates. After they ate, he sat Sophie down on the couch. She looked at him with those serious eyes, so much like Claire's, and he felt the weight of everything he was about to say. Sophie, I need to talk to you about something important. Okay, Daddy. He told her about the job offer, about the money, about the school. He kept it simple, watching her face for any sign of worry. Would we have to move? She asked. No, baby. Same apartment, same neighborhood. Would you still work at night? No, I'd work during the day. I'd be home for dinner every night. Her face lit up in a way that made his chest hurt, that made him realize how much she'd given up without ever complaining, how much she'd adapted to a life she shouldn't have had to adapt to. Really, every night. Every single one. She threw her arms around his neck. Then you should do it, Daddy. I miss you at dinner. He held her tight, his throat closing. Okay, I will. But the next day, before he could call Eleanor, everything fell apart. Someone at Grayson Industries had talked to the press. The story broke on a local news website at 9 in the morning, and by noon it had spread to 3 other outlets. Billionaire Grayson plucks waiter from diner for high-paying position. What's the real story? The article was full of speculation and insinuation. Why would a successful CEO hire someone with no experience? What was the nature of their relationship? Had they met before the diner? Was this a case of a wealthy woman buying loyalty or something more personal? By late afternoon, everyone at the diner knew. Frank wouldn't look at Nathan. Amy kept giving him sad, pitying glances. Even Walt Brennan, the owner, pulled him aside. Nathan, son, I don't know what's going on with you and that woman, but be careful. People are talking, and talk has a way of sticking. There's nothing going on. It's just a job. Walt clapped him on the shoulder, his weathered face creased with concern. I believe you, but the world's not kind to people who rise too fast. It looks for reasons to pull them back down. The worst part came that evening. Sophie's teacher called. Some of the children at school had heard their parents talking. Kids repeated things without understanding them, parroted phrases they'd overheard without knowing what the words meant or how they would land. Gold digger, scandal, the kind of playground cruelty that cuts deepest because it comes from innocence weaponized. Sophie didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She came home crying, asking if Daddy had done something bad, asking why the other kids were being mean, asking questions Nathan didn't know how to answer. He held her in his lap, wiped her tears with his thumbs. felt rage and shame and helplessness twist inside him. No, baby, Daddy didn't do anything wrong. Then why are they being mean? Because people don't always understand things. And when they don't understand, sometimes they say things that aren't true. But why? I don't know, sweetheart. I wish I did, but it's going to be okay. I promise. You always say that. And it's always true. After she fell asleep, Nathan called Eleanor. His voice was tight when she answered, controlled only by the thinnest thread of willpower. I can't do this. Nathan, listen. I can't let my daughter suffer because of me. The money isn't worth her dignity. Let me explain. I'm sorry, I can't. He hung up before she could respond. The next morning, there was a knock on his door. Nathan opened it, expecting Mrs. Patterson, expecting a delivery driver, expecting anyone except the woman standing in the hallway of his apartment building. Eleanor Grayson looked completely out of place in her expensive coat and heels, surrounded by walls that hadn't been painted in a decade and carpet that bore the stains of countless tenants. She held a small bag in one hand, and her expression was something Nathan had never seen on her face before. Uncertainty. Can I come in? He let her in because he didn't know what else to do. She looked around the tiny apartment, taking in the secondhand furniture and the toys scattered on the floor and the fold-out couch where he slept. There was no judgment in her gaze, just observation, the same careful attention she'd shown in the diner. Sophie was eating cereal at the small table, still in her pajamas, her eyes red from last night's tears. She looked up as the stranger entered, confusion and curiosity mixing on her young face. Who's that, Daddy? This is Miss Grayson. She's a friend of mine. Eleanor walked over and knelt down next to Sophie's chair, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. She moved slowly, carefully, the way you approach something precious. Hi, Sophie. I brought you something. She reached into her arm and pulled out a book. Nathan recognized it immediately, the science book from the store, the one about planets and animals and the human body, the one Sophie had wanted and then told herself she didn't need. Sophie's eyes went wide. How did you? Your dad told me you like science. I thought you might enjoy this. Sophie looked at Nathan, uncertain. He nodded. She took the book carefully, reverently, as if it might disappear if she held it too tight. Thank you. The words were barely a whisper. Eleanor stayed crouched there, her dark eyes level with Sophie's. Your dad is one of the bravest people I know. He said no to a lot of money because he loves you. He wanted to protect you. That's what real fathers do. Sophie's lip trembled. But the kids at school don't know what they're talking about. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. My mom was like your dad. She worked hard. People looked down on her sometimes. But I was proud of her. And you should be proud of your dad. He's a good man. Don't let anyone tell you different. Sophie nodded, tears running down her cheeks. Eleanor stood and turned to Nathan. I'm handling the newspaper. They'll print a retraction, and I've already called Sophie's school. If any child harasses her again, there will be consequences. She met his eyes. If you walk away, I respect that. But know this, you're not doing this for money. You're doing this so other families don't have to feel what you're feeling right now. Your daughter will be proud, not because you're rich, but because you help people. She walked to the door, then stopped. 3 days, that's what I said. You still have one left. After she was gone, Sophie climbed into Nathan's lap, still holding the book. Daddy, is she nice? He thought about it. Yeah, baby, I think she is. Then maybe you should help her, like you help people at the diner. Nathan held his daughter and looked at the book in her hands and thought about Margaret Grayson, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so her daughter could have a chance. About the construction worker who'd helped when no one else would. About the weight of kindness passed from stranger to stranger, generation to generation, rippling outward in ways no one could predict. Maybe belief wasn't about trust. Maybe it was about hope. And maybe hope was worth the risk. That night, Nathan did not sleep. At 6:30, Sophie wandered out of her room, rubbing her eyes. She was holding the book Eleanor had brought, clutching it to her chest like armor. Daddy, can I ask you something? Always, baby. If you can help other kids like me, why don't you? The question was simple, the answer was not. He thought about all his reasons, the fear of failure, the shame of accepting help, the worry that he wasn't good enough, wasn't qualified, Wasn't anything except a man who'd memorized the menu at a diner and learned how much cream Earl liked in his coffee. But Sophie was 7 years old and she already understood something he'd been too afraid to see. You're right, I should. She looked up at him with those serious eyes. Then do it, Daddy. He called Eleanor at 7. She answered on the first ring. I'm in. His voice was steadier than he'd expected. But I have conditions. I'm listening. 6 months trial period. I don't take the scholarship for Sophie until I've proven I can do the job. I keep working one shift a week at the diner to remember where I come from. And every decision about the program goes through me. I'm not a figurehead. If I do this, I do it right. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, deal, you're tougher than I thought. I learned from watching my wife work doubles. When can you start? 2 weeks. I need to give Walt proper notice. 2 weeks, Eleanor agreed. Welcome aboard, Nathan. That afternoon, Nathan went to the diner to give his notice. Walt Brennan was in his office, a cramped room behind the kitchen that was more closet than office, filled with paperwork and health department notices and photographs of the diner from decades past. He looked up when Nathan knocked on the doorframe, his weathered face creasing with something between worry and resignation. Close the door. Nathan did. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. In 2 weeks, I wanted to give you proper notice. Walt leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked every one of his 58 years. The Grayson thing. Yeah, it's real, not some kind of scam. It's real. Community outreach program, helping families like mine. Walt was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked around his desk, and put a hand on Nathan's shoulder. You're a good man, Nathan Cole. Your grandfather would be proud. You knew my grandfather. Knew of him. Everyone around here did. Harold Cole was a legend at the mill. Worked 40 years and never missed a shift. Helped start the union back when that was dangerous. Didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. Harold had died when Nathan was 12, and his memories were faded, more impression than detail. A big man with rough hands and a quiet voice. The smell of pipe tobacco and machine oil. A pocket watch he'd wind every morning with meticulous care. He used to say something. Walt's voice was distant, remembering. A man is measured by how he treats people who can't do anything for him. Heard him say it at a company meeting once when the bosses wanted to cut benefits. Stood right up and said it, and everyone shut up and listened. A man is measured by how he treats people who can't do anything for him. Nathan had heard that phrase before in a different form. His mother had said it sometimes. Claire had said it too. He'd never known where it came from. Now he did. Thank you, Walt, for everything. Don't thank me. Just don't forget where you came from. And if that Grayson woman doesn't treat you right, you come back. There's always a spot for you here. Well, that night, Nathan went home and found the box in the closet. He'd packed it years ago after his mother died, and he hadn't opened it since. Couldn't open it because the pain was too fresh and the memories too heavy. But now, with Sophie asleep and the apartment quiet and his whole life about to change, he needed to look. Inside were the remnants of his family's history. His mother's wedding ring too small to fit anyone anymore. Photographs from before he was born, his grandparents young and smiling in front of a house he'd never seen. His grandfather's army discharge papers from Korea dated 1953. A certificate from the steel mill marking 30 years of service. And at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of cloth that might once have been a handkerchief, his grandfather's pocket watch. Nathan held it in his palm. It was heavy, solid, the metal warm from being stored. The face was yellowed with age, but the hand still moved when he wound it, the mechanism ticking to life after years of stillness. On the back, engraved in small, careful letters, "Work hard, do right." He turned the watch over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, the history in it. Work hard, do right. Harold Cole's entire philosophy in 4 words. Nathan opened the watch and found something he'd never noticed before. A small piece of paper folded tiny, tucked into the space behind the face. He unfolded it carefully, the paper fragile and brown with age. It was a list written in handwriting he didn't recognize. Names, maybe 24 of them, with dates beside each one. James Warren, 1952. Robert Huang, 1953. Martha Evans, 1955. The list went on, spanning decades. Some names he recognized, neighbors from his childhood, people his grandfather had worked with. Others were strangers. At the bottom of the list, in different ink, more recent, Margaret. Waitress new in town, 1975. Nathan stared at that name. Margaret. Eleanor's mother had been named Margaret. She'd worked at a diner. She'd been helped by a stranger when she needed it most. He looked at the date, 1975. 49 years ago. Before Nathan was born, before his father was even out of high school. Before any of the life that led to this moment had begun to unfold. His grandfather had helped Eleanor's mother. The circle stretched back further than he'd known. The kindness that had saved Margaret Grayson, that had made Eleanor Grayson possible, that had created the opportunity Nathan was about to accept, it had started with Harold Cole, with a construction worker who helped a waitress, with a man who measured himself by how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. Nathan sat there in the darkness, holding the watch, feeling the weight of generations. Work hard. Do right. Nathan wound the watch and slipped it into his pocket. It ticked against his heart, steady as a promise. 2 weeks later, he walked into Grayson Industries for the first time as an employee. His suit was still the same one from his wedding, still too tight in the shoulders and too short in the pants. But his back was straight and his hands were steady. Eleanor met him on the 38th floor. Ready? No, but I'm here anyway. She smiled and it reached her eyes. That's exactly the right answer. She led him to a corner office with windows overlooking the city. It was smaller than hers, but it was real desk computer chair, his name already on the door in letters he had to stop and stare at. Nathan Cole, Community Outreach Manager. Your team is down the hall. You'll meet them in the orientation session. Your budget proposals are on your desk. I need them reviewed by Friday. Understood. Eleanor paused at the door. One more thing. The board of directors meets in 3 months to review all new initiatives. The Second Chances program will be evaluated. If the numbers don't work, they'll push to cut it. Then I'll make sure the numbers work. I know you will. She left and Nathan stood in his office looking out over a city he'd grown up in, but never really seen from this height. His phone buzzed, a text from Sophie sent from Mrs. Patterson's phone. Good luck, Daddy, I love you. He smiled and typed back, I love you too, baby. This is for you. Then he sat down at his desk, opened the budget proposals and began to work. 2 floors above in a corner office with an even more impressive view, Richard Hartwell was having a very different kind of morning. He sat behind his mahogany desk, a glass of scotch in his hand, despite the early hour watching the footage from the lobby security cameras on his laptop. Nathan Cole walking in, Eleanor Grayson greeting him, the two of them heading to the elevators together. Richard was 60 years old with silver hair that he'd learned to maintain with expensive cuts and the right products and a face that boardrooms trusted and subordinates feared. He'd been with Grayson Industries since the early days, one of the first investors when Eleanor was still working out of her garage. He'd helped build this company, had sacrificed years of his life and most of his first marriage to see it grow, and he wasn't about to watch it get derailed by Eleanor's increasingly expensive conscience. The Second Chances initiative was the latest in a long line of philanthropic ventures that were bleeding the company's bottom line. Workforce development programs, educational grants, community investment funds. None of them generated direct revenue. None of them improved quarterly earnings. And now Eleanor had hired a waiter to run the biggest one yet. Richard picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago. Tom, I need you to keep watching Nathan Cole, everything he does, everyone he talks to. Find me something I can use. Use for what, sir? Eleanor's lost her way. Someone needs to bring her back. And that someone is going to be me. He hung up and finished his scotch, watching the elevator numbers climb on the security feed. The waiter had no idea what he was walking into. The battles fought in boardrooms were bloodier than anything he had ever seen in a diner kitchen, and Richard Hartwell had never lost one yet. He intended to keep that record intact. The first month was harder than Nathan had imagined. The office on the 38th floor felt like foreign territory, every interaction laden with subtext he couldn't quite read. The other employees looked at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility, their whispers following him through hallways that echoed with the sound of expensive shoes on polished floors. That's the guy Eleanor found in a diner. 0 qualifications, 0 experience, but he gets the corner office. Must be nice to know the right people. Nathan heard it all, the comments too loud to be private, The laughs that cut off when he entered a room, the silences that spoke louder than words. He didn't respond, didn't defend himself, didn't try to explain that he'd never asked for any of this, that he'd have been perfectly happy staying at Maple Grove forever if life had given him that choice. He just worked. He arrived before anyone else and left after most had gone. He read every file in the Second Chances database until his eyes burned, learned the systems, until he could navigate them in his sleep, made calls and sent emails and built relationships with nonprofits and job placement agencies and community organizations that had been doing this work for years. Frank's words echoed in his mind. Just make sure you're not trading one kind of broke for another. He wasn't sure yet if he had. At night, he went home to Sophie, made dinner, helped with homework, read stories until her eyes closed. The rhythms of fatherhood remained the same, even as everything else changed. That constancy was an anchor, a reminder of why he was doing this and who he was doing it for. One Friday night, 3 weeks into the job, Nathan kept his promise and returned to Maple Grove Diner. Walt welcomed him back with a firm handshake and a warning, "You look tired. Don't let them work you to death." "I won't." That's what they all say. Then they forget how to rest. The familiar smells and sounds wrapped around Nathan like a blanket. The sizzle of the grill, the chatter of customers, the clatter of dishes. He put on his apron and fell back into the rhythm as if he'd never left, though his body remembered the difference. His feet ached within an hour. His shoulders cramped from carrying trays. The work that had been routine now felt like exercise, a reminder of how much effort it took to do a job most people never thought about. Earl was there, same stool, same trucker cap, same stories. Melissa came in around 9, looking different, somehow more confident, her textbooks replaced by scrubs and a hospital badge. "I passed my boards." Her smile was brighter than Nathan had ever seen it. "I'm a nurse now, for real." "I knew you would be. Because of you. What you did the meal you comped, it meant more than you know. I was ready to quit that night. Couldn't afford books, couldn't afford anything. You reminded me that not everyone is awful." She hugged him quick and fierce, and Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Pay it forward, he told her. She had. She would keep doing it for the rest of her career, every patient she helped, every life she touched. The ripples spreading outward from a single act of kindness in a diner on a Friday night. The first family Nathan helped was a woman named Diana Marsh. She arrived at his office on a Tuesday morning in early December, referred by a community center on the east side of Columbus that had been partnering with the Grayson Industries for years. 32 years old with 2 children under 10 and a face that showed every sleepless night she'd endured. Her hands trembled slightly when she shook Nathan's, and her eyes carried the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. Nathan recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for 5 years. "I don't need charity." Her voice was firm despite the trembling. "I need work. Real work that pays enough to keep my kids fed and a roof over their heads. That's exactly what we're offering." He explained the program, the way he'd rehearsed it, but also the way he meant it. The medical billing certification course would take 3 months. Childcare would be covered during her training hours. Upon completion, she'd be connected with a position at St. Vincent's Hospital entry level, but with benefits and room to grow. The salary would be nearly double what she made now, stocking shelves overnight at a grocery store while her children slept at a neighbor's apartment. Diana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" The question came out sharp, almost accusatory. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Nathan thought about how to answer. The corporate response would be something about community investment and workforce development and all the buzzwords he'd learned in his first weeks on the job. But Diana deserved better than buzzwords. 5 years ago, I was standing where you're standing. Single parent, working nights, barely making rent. Someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. I'm trying to do the same." She studied his face, looking for the law, the angle, the hidden cost. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." 3 months later, Diana Marsh completed her certification with the highest score in her class. She started at St. Vincent's on a Monday in March, and by Friday she'd already been praised by her supervisor for her attention to detail and her way with patients. Her children had health insurance for the first time in their lives. She'd moved out of the one-bedroom apartment where all 3 of them had shared a single mattress and into a two-bedroom that had actual doors on the bedrooms. She called Nathan on her first payday, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite control. "I can buy them new shoes, both of them, at the same time. Do you know how long it's been since I could do that?" Nathan knew. He knew exactly. The program grew faster than anyone had projected. Word spread through the networks that connected struggling families, the informal channels of churches and community centers, and break-room conversations. By the end of the second month, they'd helped 23 families. By the end of the third, 51. Each case was different, each solution tailored to specific circumstances, but the pattern was the same. Find out what people actually needed, connect them with resources that already existed, but that they couldn't access on their own, and then get out of the way. Frank Russo showed up at Nathan's office on a Wednesday afternoon in February. He stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable, his trucker cap in his hands, his broad shoulders hunched in a way Nathan had never seen before. The corporate environment was as foreign to Frank as it had been to Nathan, all glass and chrome, and people in suits who'd never scrubbed a grill in their lives. "I shouldn't have doubted you." The words came out rough, reluctant. "When you told me about this job, I said rich people don't give. I was wrong. You were trying to protect me. I was being a cynic. There's a difference, a big plus." Frank sat down in the chair across from Nathan's desk, and something in his posture shifted. The defensiveness faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. "I heard about what you're doing here. The training programs, the job placement. My nephew's wife went through one of your partner organizations, got certified as a pharmacy tech. First steady job she's had in years." "That's good to hear." Made me think. Frank paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been cooking at that diner for 15 years. Before that, I was a line cook in Columbus. Before that, I was a prep cook in Cleveland. 40 years in kitchens, and I'm still making barely more than minimum wage." Nathan waited, sensing where this was going, but knowing Frank needed to get there himself. "I used to dream about running my own place. Stupid dream, probably. But I used to think about it. Menus I'd design, dishes I'd create, the kind of restaurant where people came for the food, not just because it was cheap and open late. That's not a stupid dream. It's a dead one. I'm 50 years old, too late to start over." "Is it?" Frank looked up, and Nathan saw the fear beneath the resignation. The terror of hoping for something and having it snatched away. The safer choice of never reaching at all. "We have a culinary program, partnership with the Johnson Institute downtown. Full scholarship, 6 months of training, connections with restaurants all over the city. I know someone at Augustine's who's looking for a sous chef. They want someone with experience, someone who knows how a kitchen actually works, not just someone with a fancy degree." Frank's hands tightened on his cap. "I can't afford to stop working. I've got rent, bills." "The program includes a stipend, not much but enough to cover basics while you're training, and you could pick up weekend shifts at Maple Grove if you needed to. Walt would understand." For a long moment, Frank didn't speak. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay, tell me what I need to do." 2 weeks later, Frank started classes. He was the oldest student in the program by 15 years, surrounded by 20-somethings with culinary school dreams and Instagram food blogs. He struggled with the written exams, his reading skills rusty from decades of neglect. But in the kitchen during practical sessions, he came alive. The instructors noticed. His classmates noticed. The quiet, gruff man who'd spent his life being invisible suddenly wasn't. Nathan visited one of his classes, stood in the back, and watched Frank plate a dish with hands that moved like they'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. Afterward, Frank caught him in the hallway. "My son would have been proud." His voice was rough, barely audible. "He always wanted me to do something like this. Always believed I could." Nathan knew about Frank's son. Derek, dead 5 years from an overdose, another casualty of the opioid epidemic that had swept through Ohio like a plague. Frank never talked about him, but everyone at the diner knew. Everyone had seen the way Frank shut down every October around the anniversary. "He'd be proud of you now." "Maybe." Frank cleared his throat. "Anyway, thanks for seeing something I couldn't see anymore." Then in the 4th month, everything nearly fell apart. Eleanor collapsed in her office on a Thursday afternoon. Nathan was in a meeting when his phone buzzed with an emergency text from David, Eleanor's assistant. By the time he reached her floor, paramedics were already wheeling her toward the elevator, an oxygen mask over her face, her skin the color of old paper. Exhaustion, the doctor said later. She'd been working 90-hour weeks for months running the company and overseeing a dozen initiatives simultaneously. Her body had simply given out, overwhelmed by demands that exceeded what any human could sustain. They kept her overnight for observation. The next morning, while she was still in the hospital, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. Nathan wasn't invited. He learned about it from David, who pulled him aside in the hallway with fear in his eyes. They want to vote on suspending the Second Chances program. Richard Hartwell is leading the charge. Says it's too expensive, too risky, at too much overhead for unclear return on investment. Nathan felt his stomach drop. They can't do that. The family's depending on us. They can do whatever they want. They're the board. And with Eleanor in the hospital, there's no one to stop them. Nathan thought about Diana Marsh, who'd just been promoted at the hospital. Frank Russo, who was 3 months into training with the best grades he'd ever gotten. The 50-plus other families whose lives had been changed, whose futures had been redirected. He thought about his grandfather's watch ticking in his pocket. Work hard, do right. Where's the meeting? 40th floor, conference room A. But Nathan, you can't just... Nathan was already walking toward the elevator. The boardroom was everything the rest of the building promised, and more. 20-foot ceilings, a table that could seat 30, windows that made the city below look like a model waiting to be rearranged. 12 people in suits that cost more than Nathan's yearly salary at the diner, arranged around the table like generals planning a war. Richard Hartwell sat at the head, silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting, his face arranged in an expression of concerned pragmatism that Nathan recognized immediately as performance. Every head turned when Nathan walked in. "Mr. Cole," Richard's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "This is a closed meeting." "I know, I'm here anyway." Nathan didn't wait for permission. He walked toward the table, positioning himself where everyone could see him. "You want to vote on cutting the program while Eleanor is in the hospital, while the person who created it can't defend it. I'm here to ask you to wait." Richard leaned back in his chair, amusement flickering across his features. "This is a business decision, Mr. Cole. We don't postpone business decisions based on sentiment. Then postpone it based on fairness. Eleanor deserves to be present for a vote that affects her initiative. The families in the program deserve more than a rushed decision made while their advocate is unconscious. The board has a fiduciary responsibility. The board has a responsibility to make informed decisions." Nathan's voice was stronger now, the fear burning away into something closer to conviction. "Not panicked ones, not political ones. Give Eleanor a week to recover. Give me a week to prepare a proper presentation. Then vote." The room was silent. Nathan could feel Richard's eyes on him, calculating, assessing. "1 week," a woman at the far end of the table said. Nathan didn't know her name, but she looked thoughtful rather than hostile. "That seems reasonable. Richard, can we table this until next Thursday?" Richard's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine, 1 week. But Mr. Cole, I expect a comprehensive financial analysis. Numbers, not stories." Nathan met his eyes. "You'll have both." He left before anyone could say anything else. 2 hours later, Eleanor called from her hospital bed. "David told me what happened. You walked into a board meeting uninvited and demanded a postponement. I bought us a week, that's all." "That's everything." A pause. "Richard's going to come after you now, you know that." "Let him, I have work to do." He hung up and sat in his office, staring at the folder of financial data on his desk. 1 week to build a case that would save the program. 1 week to find a way to make 53 families' stories translate into numbers that would satisfy men like Richard Hartwell. His grandfather's watch ticked steadily in his pocket. Work hard, do right. He opened the folder and began. Richard Hartwell didn't become vice chairman of a billion-dollar company by accepting delay gracefully. The board meeting had been a public challenge, a waiter walking into his territory and changing the rules. That couldn't stand. That wouldn't stand. The first move came 2 days later. Subtle, deniable, but unmistakable. A new article appeared in a larger outlet questioning the Second Chances initiative more aggressively than before. It cited sources within Grayson Industries who expressed concern about the program's cost-effectiveness. It mentioned Nathan's lack of qualifications. It hinted at impropriety without ever stating anything directly actionable. Then came the pressure on Sophie's school. A group of parents, wealthy ones, the kind who donated enough to get their calls returned, began expressing concern about their children, sharing classrooms with the daughter of that man from the scandal. They didn't use those words in official communications, of course. They talked about environment and distractions and the well-being of the student body. But the message was clear. The principal called Nathan to a meeting. "We're not asking Sophie to leave." Her voice was careful, rehearsed. "But perhaps you might consider whether this environment is still the best fit for her needs." Nathan felt the anger rising hot and sharp. "My daughter hasn't done anything wrong. No one is saying she has. Then why are we having this conversation?" The principal had no answer. Or rather, she had one, but couldn't say it out loud because wealthy parents had complained, and wealthy parents got what they wanted, and Nathan's daughter was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. He left without agreeing to anything. But the message had been received. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Nathan called Eleanor. "Someone's orchestrating this. The article, the school pressure, it's coordinated." "Richard," her voice was tired. She was still recovering, still pushing herself too hard. "I confronted him about it. He denied everything, of course. But we both know. What do? We prepare for Thursday. We make the case so strong that no one can vote against it without looking like a monster. And Sophie's school, I'll make some calls. The board chair owes me several favors. By tomorrow, the pressure will stop." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. We've just bought ourselves a chance to fight." Sophie came into his room around midnight, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why aren't you sleeping?" "Just working, baby. Go back to bed." "Are you sad, though?" The question stopped him. 7 years old, and she could read him better than most adults. "Not sad, just thinking." Sophie climbed into his lap, her small body warm and trusting. "Mommy used to say that thinking too much makes your head hurt. She said sometimes you just have to do the thing and see what happens." Nathan's throat tightened. "When did she tell you that?" "I don't remember. I just remember she said it." Sophie looked up at him. "Is someone being mean to you?" "Some people are being difficult, but it's going to be okay." Promise? He thought about promises, about the ones he'd made to Claire, to Sophie, to himself, about the weight of words spoken in the dark when you couldn't see what was coming. "I promise I'll do everything I can. That's the best promise I can make." Sophie nodded, accepting this. "Okay, Daddy, that's enough." She fell asleep in his arms, and Nathan sat there holding her, watching the city lights flicker through the window. Somewhere out there, Richard Hartwell was planning his next move. But so was Nathan. The board meeting fell on a Thursday in late March, the kind of early spring day when the air still carried winter's bite, but the sun held a promise of warmth to come. Nathan arrived at Grayson Industries an hour early, his grandfather's watch heavy in his pocket. He'd polished it the night before, wound it carefully, made sure it was keeping perfect time. Harold Cole would be with him today in the only way the dead could be present, through the objects they'd left behind and the values they'd passed on. The conference room filled slowly. Board members in their expensive suits, assistants with tablets and agendas, the usual machinery of corporate governance. Richard Hartwell sat at his customary position, his silver hair gleaming, his expression one of confident control. But there were other people in the room, too. People who didn't belong here by any traditional measure. People Richard had never expected to see. Diana Marsh, wearing the professional clothes her hospital job had made possible, her children waiting with a company babysitter in a room down the hall. Frank Russo, his chef's jacket fresh from the restaurant where he'd been hired the week before the culmination of everything he'd worked toward. Melissa Torres in her nursing scrubs, her hospital badge catching the light. And behind them, filling the observers' chairs that lined the walls, a dozen more families. Men and women who'd been through the program, who'd rebuilt their lives, who'd come to bear witness to what hope looked like when someone bothered to offer it. Richard's expression flickered just for a moment. Surprise quickly suppressed. He hadn't anticipated this. He'd expected a standard business meeting, numbers and projections, and the cold calculus of profit and loss. Not faces, not stories, not the inconvenient humanity of people whose lives hung in the balance. Eleanor called the meeting to order. She looked better than she had in weeks, her recovery finally taking hold, her voice steady and strong. Before we review the Second Chances initiative, I've asked some of the program's participants to share their experiences. The board has the right to hear from the people most affected by our decisions. Richard's jaw tightened. This is highly irregular. Board meetings are for whatever the chair determines they're for. Eleanor's tone left no room for argument. Diana, would you like to begin? Diana stood, her hands clasped in front of her, her voice clear despite the trembling Nathan could see in her fingers. 6 months ago, I was working nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. My kids stayed with a neighbor because I couldn't afford childcare. I was 3 months behind on rent and one emergency away from being on the street. She paused, looking around the table at faces that had never known that kind of fear. The Second Chances program didn't just give me job training. It gave me dignity. It treated me like a person, not a statistic. When I graduated from the certification course, Nathan Cole was there. He shook my hand and told me he was proud of me. Do you know how long it had been since anyone told me that? Her voice cracked, but she continued. My children have health insurance now. They have their own beds. They have a mother who comes home at dinner time instead of leaving for work when they go to sleep. That's what this program gave us. That's what you're talking about cutting. Frank went next, his rough voice filling the room with a story of lost dreams and second chances, and a son who would never know his father had finally become what he'd always wanted to be. Then Melissa, who spoke about a cold night in a diner when a waiter refused her money and told her to pay it forward, and how that single act of kindness had become a guiding principle that shaped every patient interaction she'd had since. One by one, the families spoke. Single mothers, displaced workers, veterans struggling to reintegrate. Each story was different, but they all carried the same truth that somewhere along the way someone had seen them, and that being seen had changed everything. Richard sat through it all with an expression of studied patience. When the last speaker finished, he cleared his throat. Very moving, truly. But this board has a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Emotions don't change the fundamental question of whether this program is a sound investment of company resources. He opened a folder in front of him, pulled out a sheaf of papers. I have here an analysis showing that the Second Chances initiative has cost $12 million over the past 6 months with no measurable return to the company's bottom line. $12 million that could have gone to shareholder dividends, to research and development, to the core business functions that actually generate value. Richard looked around the table. I move to terminate the program effective immediately. Nathan stood. May I respond? Richard's smile was thin and cold. By all means, Mr. Cole, enlighten us. Nathan walked to the head of the table, positioning himself where everyone could see him. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. Mr. Hartwell is right about one thing. $12 million is a lot of money. It's more than I'll make in my entire lifetime. It's more than most of the people in this room will ever see in a single bank account. He looked at Richard directly. But Mr. Hartwell is wrong about something else. He says there's no measurable return. Let me give you some measurements. Nathan pulled out his own folder, the data he'd been compiling for months. 53 families have been through our program. 47 of them are now employed in positions that pay on average 200% of what they were making before. Their combined increase in annual income is approximately $1.2 million. Those families now pay taxes they weren't paying before. They buy goods and services they couldn't afford before. They contribute to the local economy in ways that ripple outward through every business they patronize. He set the folder on the table. But that's not the return that matters most. Nathan thought about his grandfather's watch ticking against his heart. 11 children in those families are now in stable housing for the first time. 8 of them have seen their school performance improve by a full grade level. 3 families have been able to bring elderly parents into their homes, reducing the burden on public assistance programs. 2 of our program graduates are now volunteering as mentors for new participants, creating a cycle of support that costs us nothing and generates benefits we can't even calculate. He looked around the room at the families sitting along the walls, at their faces, watching him with hope and fear and trust. You want to know the return on investment? There are children in this building right now who will grow up believing that the world can be good, that people can help each other, that they're not alone. Nathan's voice dropped quiet but caring. You can't put that on a spreadsheet, but that's what lasts. That's what changes the world. One family at a time, one act of kindness passed forward to the next generation. He turned to Richard. My grandfather worked in a steel mill for 40 years, made minimum wage most of his life. Never had much money, never owned anything fancy, never made it on to any Forbes list. But when he died, 500 people came to his funeral. 500 people whose lives he'd touched, who he'd helped, who remembered him as a man who treated everyone with dignity, whether they could do anything for him or not. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch. He left me this. On the back, it says, work hard, do right. 4 words. That's his entire legacy. 4 words that changed how I see the world. He held it up so the board could see. That's what we're building is with second chances. Not just job training, not just economic mobility. A legacy. The kind that gets passed down through generations. The kind that makes the world a little bit better than we found it. Nathan set the watch on the table. You can vote to cut this program. You have that power, but you can't cut what it's already planted in 53 families. You can't unlearn the hope they've discovered. You can't take back the dignity they've reclaimed. That's already out there in the world, spreading in ways none of us can control or measure or stop. He looked at Richard one final time. So vote however you want, but know what you're voting against. Not a budget line, not a PR initiative. A belief that people matter, that everyone deserves a chance, that the measure of a company isn't just what it earns, but what it gives. Nathan sat down. The room was silent. Eleanor called for the vote. One by one, the board members raised their hands. 10 votes to continue the program, 2 against. Richard Hartwell gathered his papers without a word and left the room. His footsteps echoed in the silence, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Eleanor caught Nathan's eye across the table. They had won. 2 months after the board meeting, Richard Hartwell resigned from Grayson Industries. The official announcement cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other opportunities. The business press speculated about disagreements with Eleanor's direction for the company. The employees whispered about the board meeting, about the waiter who had stood up to the vice chairman and won. Nathan learned about it from David, who stopped by his office with a cup of coffee and a barely suppressed smile. He's gone, cleaned out his office this morning. I didn't want him gone, I just wanted him to stop. Same thing in the end. Men like Richard don't know how to lose gracefully. Once the board sided with you, his position was untenable. Nathan thought about the man who had tried to destroy him, who had orchestrated newspaper articles and school petitions and whispered campaigns. Richard Hartwell had spent his entire career building power in boardrooms, and he'd been undone by a former waiter with a pocket watch and a room full of families who'd learned to hope again. Is Eleanor okay with this? She's relieved. Richard was a good businessman, but he lost sight of why we were building something in the first place. Grayson Industries isn't just about profit. It never was. David left, and Nathan sat alone in his office watching the sunset over the city. The adrenaline of victory had faded weeks ago, replaced by the steady rhythm of work and purpose. There were still families to help, still programs to build, still battles to fight. But the biggest one was over, and they had won. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. When are you coming home? Mrs. Patterson made cookies. Nathan smiled and typed back, on my way. Save me the ones with chocolate chips. He gathered his things and headed for the elevator, the watch ticking steadily in his pocket. 6 months later, on a Friday night in October, Nathan returned to Maple Grove Diner. Walt had called him the week after the board meeting, apologizing so profusely that Nathan had to interrupt him 3 times. The job was his if he wanted it. 1 shift a week, same as before. A reminder of where he came from, just like he'd promised himself. The diner hadn't changed. The same Formica counter faded to something between blue and gray. The same vinyl booths patched with tape that was no longer temporary. The same smell of coffee and grease and apple pie. Earl still sat at his regular stool, still told the same stories, still pushed his whiskey away when Nathan reminded him about the road ahead. But other things had changed. Frank was gone, working as sous chef at Augustine's, already being talked about as someone to watch. Melissa dropped by sometimes, leaving tips that would have fed her for a week during her student days. The new servers knew Nathan only as the guy who'd started the program, the one Eleanor Grayson had plucked from obscurity and turned into something else. Sophie was asleep at home, Mrs. Patterson watching over her like always. But the apartment was different now. Nathan had his own bedroom, a real one, with a door and a bed that didn't fold out from a couch. Sophie had bookshelves filled with volumes about planets and dinosaurs and everything else that fascinated her. The electricity was never at risk of being cut off. The car had new brakes. Not rich, but enough. Finally, beautifully enough. Near closing time, a young man walked in. He was maybe 25, wearing work clothes stained with paint, his face carrying the exhaustion Nathan recognized from 1,000 nights of looking in the mirror. He sat at the counter and studied the menu with the careful attention of someone counting every dollar in his wallet. He ordered the cheapest coffee and nothing else. Nathan brought it over with a smile he'd been practicing for 5 years. Long day, long week, long month, really. The young man tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Just trying to make it through. I know that feeling. When the man asked for his check, Nathan brought it over. $2.50. The man pulled out his wallet and counted. 3 ones, some coins. Not quite enough for a tip, barely enough for the coffee itself. Nathan picked up the check. Someone paid it forward for you. Just remember to do the same someday when you can. The man looked up, his eyes suddenly bright. Seriously, thank you. I really needed this tonight. I know. That's why. After the man left, Nathan cleared the counter and noticed the woman sitting in the corner booth, the same booth where everything had started almost a year ago. Eleanor Grayson sat with a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie she hadn't touched. She was smiling. Nathan walked over. Most CEOs don't spend Friday nights in diners. Most CEOs don't know what they're missing. She finished her coffee and stood placing two $50 bills on the table. Beneath them, a folded note. Nathan picked it up. The handwriting was familiar. You're doing beautifully. Keep going. He looked up, but she was already walking toward the door. She paused and turned back. That young man you just helped. His name is Kevin Holloway. He's a painter. Good one, too, putting himself through art school, working 3 jobs. How do you know that? Eleanor smiled. Because I've been watching him, the way I watched you. She paused and something shifted in her expression. Something she'd been holding back. There's something else I should tell you. Something I've known for 3 years but didn't say. Nathan waited. The man who helped my mother in 1975. The construction worker who organized the fundraiser. I spent years trying to find him. When I finally did, he had already passed. But I found his name. Her eyes met his. Harold Cole, your grandfather. The words hit Nathan like a physical blow. He reached for the counter to steady himself. You knew all this time, you knew. I knew before I ever walked into this diner. Before I sat in that booth and watched you work. I'd been looking for Harold Cole's family for 2 years. When I found you, when I saw what you'd become, I knew I had to meet you. Had to see if you were like him. So the test, the 0 tip, it wasn't just about finding someone good. It was about finding you, specifically you. The grandson of the man who saved my mother's life. Nathan's mind raced, reordering everything he'd thought he understood. The note, the job offer, the program, all of it had been connected to something that started 49 years ago in a diner not so different from this one, when a construction worker noticed a waitress who was struggling and decided to help. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know you'd do it anyway, without the weight of legacy, without the obligation of blood. I needed to know you were good because you chose to be, not because you felt you had to be. Eleanor took a step toward him. Your grandfather saved my mother. His kindness made my entire life possible. Everything I've built, everything I've accomplished, exists because a man with nothing decided to help a stranger. She placed a hand on his arm. You're the same. You would have done it even if you'd never known. That's what makes you worth believing in. Nathan stood there feeling the weight of generations settle around him. His grandfather's kindness passed to Margaret Grayson. Margaret's values passed to Eleanor. Eleanor's opportunity passed to him. And now his kindness passed to Diana and Frank and Melissa and Kevin and all the others whose lives had changed because someone bothered to see them. The circle wasn't closed, it was expanding. Thank you, he said finally, for telling me. Thank you for being who you are. She left and Nathan stood there holding the note and the $100. He put the money in the tip jar where it would be split among the morning crew. But he kept the note. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were quiet. Nathan locked up the diner and walked to his car, his grandfather's watch ticking steadily in his pocket. But he didn't drive home. Not yet. Instead, he drove to the cemetery on the edge of town, where the headstones caught the moonlight and the grass was still wet from the evening's rain. Two graves side by side. Harold Cole, 1931-2003. Claire Cole, 1989-2019. Nathan knelt between them, the damp earth soaking through his pants. Hey, Grandpa. Hey, Claire. The words came easier than he'd expected. I know now, Grandpa, about Margaret Grayson, about what you did in 1975. Eleanor told me tonight. He pulled out the watch and held it in his palm. You never knew what came of it. Never knew that the waitress you helped would raise a daughter who'd build an empire. Never knew that empire would reach back across the decades and find your grandson and give him a chance to do what you did. He looked at Claire's headstone. And you, Claire, you always said kindness was like breathing. So natural you don't even notice. You were right. Grandpa breathed it his whole life, and I never even knew the names of all the people he helped. But they knew. Margaret knew, and she passed it on. Nathan wound the watch, feeling the familiar resistance of the spring, hearing the tick resume its steady rhythm. I'm going to give this to Sophie when she's older. So she knows where she comes from. So she knows that legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about how you treat the people you meet along the way. He stood, brushed the grass from his knees. I'm doing okay. We're doing okay. Sophie's growing up strong and kind and brave. She reminds me of both of you in different ways. The best parts of everyone who came before. He looked at the two graves one more time. I have to go home now. She'll be awake in a few hours wanting pancakes. But I'll come back. I always come back. He walked to his car, the watch warm against his chest. The drive home took 12 minutes. The apartment building looked the same as always, worn, but standing a place that had become home through the sheer accumulation of days lived within its walls. Sophie was asleep when he checked on her, Mr. Buttons clutched tight, her face peaceful in the glow of the owl nightlight. On her pillow, a drawing she'd made earlier that day. 3 figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Daddy, Sophie, and Mommy with wings floating above them, both watching over everything. Nathan picked it up carefully, studying the crayon strokes, the love evident in every line. We're okay, Asa, he whispered to the room, to the darkness, to whoever might be listening. We're going to be okay. He placed the drawing back on Sophie's pillow and went to his own room. Tomorrow there would be more work, more families to help, more kindness to pass forward. The program would keep growing, keep reaching, keep proving that investment in human dignity paid dividends no spreadsheet could capture. But tonight, Nathan Cole was just a father coming home from work, a man who'd learned that enough was finally enough, a link in a chain of kindness stretching back through generations and forward into futures he would never see. The watch ticked against his heart. Work hard, do right. He closed his eyes and slept.